The rain came in sideways that night, not the soft kind that taps at windows and fades, the hard, cold kind that soaks through everything, your jacket, your boots, your resolve. Sarah and Mark were almost back to the truck when Sarah stopped walking. There was something on the side of the road. She almost didn't see it. It wasn't moving, just a small dark shape, pressed flat against the gravel, completely still, the way something goes still when it has used up almost everything it had left. Mark leaned down with his flashlight, and for a moment neither of them spoke. What they found that night would change their family in ways they couldn't begin to imagine, but they didn't know that yet. All they knew in that moment was that they couldn't leave her there. Saving Luna. She was so small she fit in one hand. The vet on call that night, a quiet woman named Dr. Hensley, who had seen most things in her 20 years of practice, went very still when she examined her. She asked Sarah and Mark where exactly they had found her. She asked if there were others nearby. Then she sat back and said, carefully, that this was not a domestic cat. This was a Pallas's cat, one of the rarest wild felids in North America outside of specialty sanctuaries. Flat-faced, broad-eared, with fur so thick it made her look twice her actual size. And she was, Dr. Hensley said quietly, in very bad shape, dehydrated, hypothermic. Probably 3 to 4 weeks old, no mother in sight. Survival odds for a wild kitten this young, this compromised, without her mother. Dr. Hensley didn't give numbers, she just said they would do what they could, and that the next 48 hours would tell them a great deal. Sarah and Mark drove home in silence. They named her Luna that same night. Neither of them remembers who suggested it first. The next 2 weeks were a blur of 2-hour feeding cycles, warming pads, towels fresh from the dryer, and a kitchen that smelled permanently of kitten formula. Mark took the midnight shifts. Sarah took the early mornings. They moved through the house like people on different schedules in the same quiet emergency, passing each other in hallways with bottles and towels, and the careful, focused expressions of people who have decided something matters. Luna was not easy to feed. She fussed. She turned her face away. Some nights she barely took anything, and Sarah would sit at the kitchen table afterward, just watching the tiny rise and fall of Luna's chest under the warming cloth, counting breaths. But she kept breathing. And then, slowly, she started to eat, meeting baby Ethan. Their son Ethan was 6 months old that fall, round-faced, endlessly curious, at the stage where every object within reach required immediate investigation. He had been an easy baby in most ways, content, observant, slow to fuss. But when Luna came home, something shifted in him. He noticed her immediately, not with excitement, not with the grabbing energy babies bring to most new things. He just watched her, still and focused, tracking her movements across the room with an attention he rarely gave anything else. Sarah noticed it first. She mentioned it to Mark one evening almost as a joke, that Ethan seemed more interested in Luna than in his own toys. Luna, for her part, was cautious at first. She kept her distance, observed from elevated spots, the back of the couch, the arm of the chair. Her ears, those wide, flat ears swiveling toward him whenever he made a sound, but within a few days she had moved closer. By the end of the first week she had chosen a spot beside his bouncer seat on the living room rug, not touching him, just near. Present in the way animals are present when they have decided something is worth watching. The first night she slept beside his crib, Sarah stood in the doorway for a long time before she went back to bed, growing bond. Months passed. Luna grew. Ethan grew faster. He learned to crawl in January, lurching forward on his hands and knees across the kitchen floor with a concentration that made him look, Mark said, like a very small man moving furniture. Luna watched from a few feet back, then she followed, not chasing him, keeping pace, moving when he moved, stopping when he stopped, maintaining that careful distance, close enough to watch, far enough to have space. Sarah started filming it. She couldn't help herself. There was something about the pairing that was genuinely hard to look away from, this small, determined boy, and this strange, ancient-looking wild cat, moving together through the house like they had worked out some arrangement nobody else was aware of. Their neighbor Carol saw one of the videos and laughed. "You've got yourself a babysitter," she said. The family had started using the same word. It was funny. It was also, in some way they hadn't quite articulated yet, not entirely a joke. Luna didn't play with Ethan the way a house cat might. She didn't bat at him or knock things over near him for entertainment. She watched him, she followed him, and she was always between him and the door. First warning sign. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. Sarah was in the kitchen. Ethan was crawling across the living room floor, making his way toward the far wall where a row of low bookshelves held paperbacks and a few old framed photos. He'd made that same path a dozen times. Luna was following him as usual. Then she wasn't. She moved in front of him, stopped, planted herself directly in his path and went completely still, not playful, not distracted, rigid, her ears flat, her eyes locked on something near the wall. And then she made a sound Sarah had never heard her make before, low, rough, from somewhere in her chest, not a hiss. Something older than a hiss. Sarah came to the kitchen doorway. "Luna, what?" Ethan had stopped crawling. He sat back on his heels, confused, looking up at the cat in front of him. Luna didn't move. Sarah crossed the room to scoop Ethan up. She wasn't sure why, just instinct, and she was 3 steps away when she heard it. The shelf didn't fall all the way. One bracket gave, and the right side dropped hard, sending a row of heavy books sliding and crashing onto exactly the stretch of floor where Ethan had been crawling, the spot where Luna had been standing between him and whatever she had sensed coming. The room went very quiet. Sarah stood holding Ethan against her chest, her heart slamming, staring at the scattered books and the bent bracket and the long skid mark in the carpet. Luna sat a few feet away, still watching the shelf, still completely still. Sarah looked at her, then at the books, then back at her. That was the moment the jokes about the babysitter stopped. After the bookshelf, things were different, not dramatically different. There was no family meeting, no long conversation about what had happened. Sarah and Mark didn't have a name for what Luna had done. They weren't sure they wanted one. But they both noticed things now that they had been half noticing for months without quite registering. Luna positioned herself between Ethan and every door in every room they were in together. When Ethan napped, she was outside his room, not inside, always outside, curled against the base of the door like something placed there on purpose. When he cried in the night, she was already at the door before either parent had made it down the hall, not meowing, not making any sound. Just there, alert, waiting. Mark started paying closer attention. He noticed that Luna rarely relaxed fully when Ethan was awake and moving. She would rest, but with her head up, eyes open. That wide, flat face turned toward wherever Ethan was in the room, ears making small adjustments the way a satellite dish moves, small, constant, tracking. He mentioned it to Sarah one evening after they'd put Ethan down. "She doesn't really sleep when he's awake," he said. Sarah thought about it. "No," she said, "she doesn't." They sat with that for a moment. Neither of them said what they were both starting to think. Incredible incidents. The fever came in April, 3 weeks after the bookshelf. Ethan had been fussy that afternoon, but nothing alarming. Some days were just harder than others. Sarah had put him down for his evening sleep a little early and gone to fold laundry in the bedroom. Mark was outside. The house was quiet. Luna started scratching at Ethan's door. Not the way a cat scratches to be let in somewhere. Persistent, rhythmic, returning every few seconds with the focused insistence of something that has already decided this matters and is waiting for the humans to catch up. Sarah came out of the bedroom. Luna was at Ethan's door, scratching, looking back at her, scratching again. Sarah opened the door. Ethan was on his back, breathing in a way that wasn't right, shallow, fast, his small chest working harder than it should have been. She touched his forehead and pulled her hand back. He was burning. His temperature was 104.1. The pediatrician on call said they'd caught it early enough that it hadn't gone further. She said Sarah had done the right thing coming in when she did. Sarah didn't correct her. She wasn't sure how to explain who had actually caught it. On the drive home, with Ethan strapped in and cooling down and finally asleep, she thought about the scratching, the rhythm of it, the way Luna had looked back at her. Not panicked, not frantic, just certain. The way something looks when it has already assessed the situation and arrived at a conclusion and needs one more person to get there. She thought about that for a long time. Unbreakable friendship. By summer, Ethan was pulling himself upright against the furniture. He would grab the edge of the coffee table or the side of the couch and haul himself up, legs shaking, face concentrated, and stand there swaying slightly with the proud and precarious look of someone who has just done something genuinely difficult. Luna would watch these attempts from a few feet away. When he fell, and he fell constantly, soft landings on the carpet, more surprised than hurt, she would watch him get back up. She never fussed over him when he fell. She never rushed over. She just watched him get back up, which Sarah thought was its own kind of thing. His first real steps happened on a Thursday morning in July. 6 steps across the kitchen, then sitting down hard. Mark wasn't home. Sarah was there, and she cried a little, and Luna was there too, watching from the kitchen doorway, ears forward, still as a photograph. After that, they moved together through the house differently. Ethan walking now, unsteady and determined, Luna at his side, or just behind. They had developed something that looked, the more you watched it, less like a pet following a child, and more like two creatures who had arrived at some private understanding about how the days were supposed to go. Ethan had started reaching for her. Not grabbing, he seemed to understand instinctively that Luna was not a toy, that she had terms. He would extend his hand, palm up, and wait. Sometimes she came to him, sometimes she didn't. When she did, he would rest his hand very gently on her broad head, and she would go still, and for a few seconds the room would hold something that was hard to describe and harder to look away from. Public attention. Mark had been filming for months by then. Short clips, Luna following Ethan down the hallway, Luna outside the crib, Luna watching Ethan eat from across the kitchen with that flat, unreadable expression that made her look like a small, extremely serious professor. He posted one in August, mostly because his sister asked to see it. He didn't expect anything. By the following morning it had 400,000 views. By the end of the week it was closer to 8 million. The comments were mostly warmth. People moved, people sharing it with their mothers and their grown children, people writing long paragraphs about animals they had loved and lost. But mixed in were other voices, animal behaviorists who said the behavior had a simpler explanation, wildlife advocates who raised concerns about a Pallas's cat living domestically, a few who questioned whether the bookshelf incident and the fever were coincidence, pattern recognition, or something people wanted to be true because the story was a good one. Sarah read some of it. Then she put her phone down and watched Luna sitting at the end of the hallway, waiting for Ethan to finish his lunch. She didn't have a response to the skeptics. She just had what she had seen. The first real danger. The picnic was Mark's idea. A Saturday in late September, a state park 40 minutes from home, one of those last warm weekends before the year turns. They brought Luna. They always brought Luna now for outdoor time. She wore a long lid, moved through open spaces with the quiet alertness of an animal that understands the difference between inside and outside, and takes both seriously. Ethan walked beside her, holding Mark's hand, pointing at things. They set up near a clearing at the edge of a tree line. Luna explored the perimeter of her lead radius, smelled everything, settled near the blanket. Ethan ate half a sandwich and declared himself finished. The afternoon was slow and warm and easy. Then Ethan found the path. There was a narrow dirt trail that curved away from the clearing into the trees, the kind of thing that looks like a short, interesting detour when you are not quite 2 years old and the world is still mostly unexplored. He had wandered 8 or 10 feet down it before either parent looked up. "Ethan, come back this way, buddy." Mark started to stand. Luna was already moving, not trotting, running, the lead pulling taut and then snapping free from where it had been loosely staked, and she was down the path and into the trees and gone before Mark had fully gotten to his feet. Sarah was already moving toward the trail. "Ethan?" Her voice calm on the surface, the way voices go calm when the fear underneath is too large to let out. The trees were quiet. The path curved and disappeared. Mark reached her side. They stood at the entrance to the trail together, listening. The clearing behind them held the blanket, the half-eaten sandwiches, the ordinary remains of a Saturday afternoon. Ahead, the path was empty. Their son was gone. The first 30 seconds are the ones Sarah still can't fully describe. Not chaos. Something worse than chaos. A horrible stillness, the kind that arrives when your mind is moving too fast for your body to catch up. She was calling Ethan's name before she realized she was moving. Mark was already down the path, pushing through the curve in the trail where the trees closed in on both sides, and the light dropped and the ground started sloping away toward something she couldn't yet see. The forest around them was quiet in the way that feels like it is listening. She called again. Her voice came back to her flat and absorbed, swallowed by the trees. No answer, no small voice, no rustling, nothing. Mark stopped ahead of her. She reached him and looked past his shoulder and saw what he was seeing. The trail ended where the ground broke open into a long, shallow ravine, maybe 12 feet deep, rocky at the bottom, the edge uneven and crumbling in places where the soil had given way. A drop that would not kill a child but would hurt one very badly. The ravine ran in both directions as far as they could see. No Ethan, no Luna. Which way? It wasn't a question. Mark said it the way you say things when the answer has to come from somewhere faster than thinking. Sarah didn't know. She looked left, then right, then left again. The light was going amber through the trees, maybe 2 hours until dark. She felt that fact land in her chest like a stone. Luna went left, Mark said. He was already moving. Luna leads the search. They heard her first. Not a loud sound. Luna rarely made loud sounds, but there was something, a low repeated call, short and even, coming from somewhere ahead and to the left. Not distress, something more deliberate than distress. The sound of an animal that has found what it was looking for and is now waiting for the rest of the group to arrive. Mark picked up his pace. Sarah followed. The trail curved again, and the tree line thinned, and then they saw her, Luna, 30 feet ahead, sitting at the very edge of the ravine. Not moving, not pacing, sitting with the composed, absolute stillness that was her particular signature, her broad face turned toward them, her tail wrapped around her feet, and beside her, sitting in the dirt, with his legs hanging over absolutely nothing, was Ethan. He had found the edge and stopped, or something had stopped him. He was sitting back from the drop by maybe 18 inches, not crying, not frightened, just sitting in the patient way toddlers sit when they have arrived somewhere interesting and are waiting to see what happens next. One hand was resting on Luna's back. She had not moved him. She couldn't move him. What she had done, it appeared, was sit down directly beside him at the edge of the drop and stay there, a warm, solid presence between him and the empty air, until the people who could actually do something arrived. Mark reached them first. He picked Ethan up in one motion, held him against his chest, and stood there for a moment with his eyes closed and one hand pressed flat against the back of Ethan's head. Sarah stopped a few feet away. She looked at Luna. Luna looked back at her. Then she stood, stretched once, and walked calmly back toward the trail as if this had been the plan all along. Hero moment. Later, when they had packed up the picnic and driven home, and put Ethan down and were finally sitting at the kitchen table with cups of tea neither of them was really drinking, Mark pulled up the photos he had taken at the scene. Habit, documentation, the instinct of someone who has spent months recording things. He found what he was looking for in the third image. The dirt near the ravine edge was soft from recent rain, and in it, clearly, were 2 sets of tracks, Ethan's small shoe prints moving toward the drop, and alongside them, pressed deep and deliberate, Luna's paw prints, arriving at the same moment, stopping at the same place. She hadn't followed him there. The tracks showed she had reached him at the edge nearly at the same time, which meant she had run ahead on the path, cut through the trees and intercepted him before he could go further. Mark set his phone down on the table. They sat with that for a while. The bookshelf, the fever, and now this. 3 times Luna had placed herself between Ethan and something that could have hurt him. 3 times before anyone else had known to move. Sarah thought about the night they had found her, that small dark shape on the wet gravel, flat and still, almost gone. She thought about the kitchen at 2 in the morning, the formula, the warming cloth, the counting of breaths. She wasn't sure what you called what Luna had given them in return. She wasn't sure a word existed for it that didn't sound smaller than the thing itself. Family realization. They stopped trying to explain it after that. Not because there was nothing to say. There was too much to say, and none of it came out right when they tried. Mark had attempted it once in an interview request that came after the picnic video spread, and he had listened to himself answering and thought, that is not what this is. That is the shape of what this is, but not the thing. What they knew, in the way you know things that don't require explanation, was this. Luna had not stumbled into protecting Ethan. There was nothing accidental in any of it. From the first week she had watched him with a quality of attention that most people never directed anything. She had tracked his sounds and his movements and his rhythms. She had learned the difference between his ordinary fussing and something that needed a response. She had, in her own terms, in the particular language available to a Pallas's cat living in a house in the middle of a life she had not been born into, decided that he was hers to watch over. Nobody taught her that. Nobody could have. Time passes. The years moved the way years do when you are not paying close enough attention. Ethan grew into a boy, talkative, curious, with a particular fondness for being outside, and a low tolerance for sitting still. Luna grew into herself fully, that extraordinary wild coat thickening in winter, her movements slower and more considered than they had been, the quality of her watching unchanged. They aged alongside each other. Different rates, different shapes of time, a child's years and a wild cat's years running parallel, neither one aware of the distance between them. The bond between them deepened in the way things deepen when they are not performed for anyone. Ethan had stopped reaching for her with that careful open palm gesture. He had learned her moods and her terms so completely that he rarely needed to. He would simply settle near her, and she would settle near him, and that was the whole of it. There were evenings when Sarah would come into the living room and find them both asleep on the couch. Ethan's head tipped back, Luna curled against his side, that wide flat face pointing at the door even in sleep, still watching. Even then, new challenge. The letter from the Wildlife Authority arrived on a Tuesday. Formal language, official letterhead, a request for an assessment visit, citing concerns about the long-term welfare of a Pallas's cat living in a domestic environment. Someone had filed a report, they never found out who. The letter was careful and not unkind, but its implication was clear. Luna could not simply remain as she was indefinitely. She was a protected wild species. There were protocols, there were facilities better equipped, the letter suggested, to provide for her needs. Sarah read it twice, then set it on the kitchen counter and stood looking at it. From down the hall came the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon, Ethan's voice, Luna's faint movement, the small, unremarkable sounds of a life that had been built around the presence of something rare and chosen, and now possibly temporary. That evening, Sarah sat beside Ethan on his bed and told him what the letter had said. She kept her voice even, she chose her words carefully, she watched his face move through something she didn't have a name for. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, very simply, "They can't take her. She's family." Sarah pulled him close and didn't answer, because the thing she couldn't tell him, the thing that had kept her standing at the kitchen counter staring at that letter for a long time, was that what they wanted didn't always decide what happened. And the people coming to make that decision had never seen what she had seen. They had never counted Luna's breaths in a cold kitchen at 2 a.m. They had never stood at the edge of a ravine and understood fully what they owed her. The assessment was scheduled for the following month. For the first time in years, Sarah lay awake listening to the house, and for the first time in years the sound of Luna outside Ethan's door in the dark didn't feel like comfort. It felt like something she was already beginning to grieve. The weeks before the assessment were the quietest the house had ever felt. Not empty, there was still the ordinary noise of daily life, meals and school mornings and the television in the evenings, but underneath all of it ran something unspoken, the way cold runs under a floorboard in winter. Everyone felt it, even Ethan, who at 7 didn't yet have the vocabulary for what anticipatory grief feels like, had gone quieter than usual. He spent more time on the floor near Luna, less time asking to go outside. Luna seemed unchanged. That was the hardest part. She moved through her days with the same measured attention she always had, stationed outside Ethan's door at night, tracking the household from her usual spots, watching Ethan with that steady, considering gaze that had never once in all these years looked like anything other than exactly what it was. She didn't know what was coming, or if she did, she had found some way to hold it that humans don't have access to. Sarah found herself watching Luna differently in those weeks, noticing things she had long stopped noticing because they had become ordinary. The way Luna always oriented toward wherever Ethan was in a room, the small ear adjustments, the quiet repositioning. She was cataloging, she realized, the way you memorize a face before a long goodbye. She didn't share that with Ethan. Some things you carry alone. Final evaluation. The specialists arrived on a Friday morning, 2 of them, a wildlife behaviorist named Dr. Carver and a habitat welfare consultant whose name Sarah immediately forgot because she was too busy watching Luna watch them come through the door. Luna did not hide. She observed them from the arm of the couch with the cool, unhurried attention she brought to everything unfamiliar, not defensive, not friendly, simply assessing. Her ears moved once, tracking Dr. Carver's voice, and then she went still. They spent 4 hours in the house. They asked questions Sarah had answered 100 times in interviews and had never gotten quite right. They moved through the rooms with clipboards and quiet observations, and the careful professional neutrality of people who have learned not to let their faces show conclusions before they have finished drawing them. Ethan came home from school at 3. He walked in, set down his backpack, and went directly to Luna the way he always did, settling beside her on the couch without ceremony, without announcement, the way you move toward something that has always been there, and you expect will always be there. Dr. Carver watched that for a long moment without writing anything down. Then she looked at Sarah, and something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small degree of softening, the kind that happens when a professional encounters something that doesn't fit neatly into any of the categories they came prepared to apply. She said they would be in touch within 2 weeks. Sarah walked them to the door and stood on the porch after they left, arms crossed against the October air, watching their car disappear down the road. 2 weeks. She went back inside. Unexpected decision. The call came in 11 days. Dr. Carver was measured and precise in the way that people are when they want to be clearly understood. She said the assessment team had reviewed their findings at length. She said that Pallas's cats, while protected, were not prohibited from domestic settings in cases where welfare conditions met a specific threshold, and in Luna's case, by every measure they had applied, those conditions were not merely met, they were, she said, exceptional. Luna showed no chronic stress behaviors, no pacing, no aggression, no compulsive patterns. Her environment was enriched, her routines were stable, and her social bond, she paused briefly on that phrase, her social bond with the family appeared to be a genuine source of security, rather than a source of conflict with her wild nature. There was a condition. Luna would be registered under a special protected status. There would be annual welfare checks. Any change in her condition or behavior would require reassessment. Sarah said yes before Dr. Carver had finished explaining. She hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table and pressed both hands flat against the surface and breathed. From the living room came the sound of Ethan talking to Luna, in the low conversational way he always talked to her. Not performing, not narrating, just talking, the way you talk to someone who knows you well enough that the words are almost beside the point. Sarah put her head down on her arms and cried for about 2 minutes. Then she got up and went to tell them. Emotional years. Time does what it always does. Ethan started school in earnest, real school, with homework and friendships and the complicated social architecture of childhood that has nothing to do with home. He grew into his own shape, quieter than Mark, more observant than most kids his age. He had, his teachers noted more than once, an unusual quality of patience, an ability to sit with things rather than rushing toward them. Sarah never pointed out where she thought that might have come from. Every afternoon when the school bus pulled away at the end of the road, Luna was at the front window, not performing it, not waiting dramatically, just there, in the way she was always just there, the household's constant and its compass. And every afternoon Ethan came through the door, dropped his bag, and found her. The annual welfare checks became routine. Dr. Carver did most of them herself. She never said anything beyond what was professional, but she always stayed a little longer than strictly necessary, and she always paused at the door on her way out to look back at the two of them on the couch, the growing boy and the aging cat, arranged beside each other in the particular comfortable silence of two creatures who have run out of things to prove to one another. Once, leaving, she said to Sarah, "I've done a lot of these assessments." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Full circle. Ethan was 10 when he first asked his parents to tell him the whole story. Not the version he'd grown up with, the short version, the funny version, the one with the bookshelf and the fever and the ravine that had become family mythology, told at dinners and to relatives and repeated often enough that it had taken on the smooth, familiar shape of a story that knows itself. He wanted the full version, the night they found her. The kitchen at 2 in the morning, the counting of breaths. They told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When they finished he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "So she was almost gone." "Yes," Sarah said. He thought about that. Then he looked across the room to where Luna was resting in her evening spot, that broad, flat face tipped slightly toward him even in her half-sleep, ears making their small adjustments. "She didn't know we were going to find her," he said. "It wasn't a question." "No," Mark said, "she didn't." Ethan nodded slowly. Something in his face had gone still and serious in the way that happens when a child encounters, for the first time, the full weight of a thing they had only known the outline of before. He got up from the table and went and sat beside Luna. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand on her back, very gently, and stayed there. Final scare. The winter Ethan turned 12, Luna got sick. It came on slowly, the way things do in older animals, a reluctance to eat, a stillness that was different from her ordinary stillness, a quality of withdrawal that the family recognized immediately because they had learned to read her so completely. She stopped going to the front window in the afternoons. She slept more and deeper, and the ear adjustments came slower and less often. Dr. Carver came out herself, outside the regular assessment schedule. The visit was quiet and thorough, and at the end of it she said what she could say honestly, that Luna was old for a Pallas's cat living well, that her systems were slowing in the way all systems slow, and that what happened next would depend on how she responded to treatment and on things that medicine couldn't fully predict. Ethan handled it the way he handled most things, by staying close. He moved his homework to the living room floor. He ate dinner there some nights. He didn't make a production of it, didn't announce that he was keeping vigil. He just arranged his days so that wherever Luna was, he was nearby, the way she had always arranged hers. Sarah watched this from the kitchen doorway one evening and had to look away. He was doing exactly what she had done. In that cold kitchen all those years ago, watching the rise and fall of a tiny chest, counting breaths. He had learned it from her. Or maybe he had learned it from Luna. Maybe there was no difference. Last beautiful moment. She responded to the treatment. Slowly, then with more certainty. The eating came back first. Then the stillness changed quality again, back to the watchful kind rather than the withdrawn kind. Then one afternoon, 11 days into Ethan's vigil, she got up from her sleeping spot and walked to the front window and sat down. Ethan looked up from his homework. He didn't say anything. He just watched her sit there in the winter light, her broad silhouette against the gray afternoon, ears forward, watching the end of the road. The school bus wasn't coming. It was a Saturday. There was nothing out there to wait for. But she sat there anyway, the way she always sat there, present and patient and facing the direction from which the people she had chosen always eventually returned. Ethan closed his textbook. He went and sat beside her on the window seat, close enough that their warmth ran together, and he looked out at the same empty road she was looking at, and neither of them moved for a long time. Powerful ending. Luna recovered. Not to what she had been. Time doesn't run backward, and she was old now in the way that carries its whole history visibly, in the slower movements, in the deeper sleep, and the particular gentleness that age sometimes brings to wild things when they have been loved long enough. But she was there, present, still watching. Her world had grown smaller and quieter, the way worlds do. She no longer covered the whole house on her evening rounds. She had her spots, the window seat, the foot of Ethan's bed, the kitchen threshold where the warm air from the oven gathered in winter. She moved between them with the dignity of an animal that has earned the right to choose its own distances, and Ethan was always somewhere in the radius of those spots. Not hovering. He was a teenager now, with his own life pulling in its own directions, schoolwork and friends, and the gathering shape of a future that had nothing to do with home. But he always came back, and when he did, he always found her, and she always had one ear turned toward the door, even in sleep, even now. Final scene. There is an evening in late autumn. Ethan is 14, maybe 15 at that age where boys are briefly awkward in their own length, still finding where everything goes, when he comes home and finds Luna on the porch. She has gotten herself to the top step, which took more than it used to, and she is sitting in the last of the day's light with her face tipped slightly upward. The sky has gone the color of embers. The trees at the edge of the yard have lost most of their leaves and stand in their bare winter shapes against the orange and the fading blue. Ethan sets his bag inside the door and comes back out and sits beside her. He doesn't say anything. She doesn't move, except that after a moment she leans, slowly, deliberately, with the full settled weight of something that has decided, and rests her head against his arm. The light moves across the porch. The yard goes quiet. The sky deepens. Neither of them looks at the other. They just sit there together in the last of the warmth, two creatures at different points in their lives, watching the same evening arrive. We thought we rescued a lonely Pallas's cat kitten on a rainy road one night. We didn't understand, back then, what we were really doing. We were meeting someone who would spend her whole life, every quiet vigil, every careful positioning, every counted breath in the dark, making sure we were all still here. We thought we saved her. In truth, she spent her whole life rescuing us.